Well, let me go ahead and welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming out this evening. You join us here for a workshop to discuss the homeless count that was recently conducted earlier this year, 2018, for the city of Pasadena. So beginning with introductions, my name is Dan Davidson. I pastor a church here in Pasadena, Rose City Church, and we recently opened a coffee shop called Rosebud Coffee. There we're training transitional age youth and formerly homeless youth in the craft of coffee to help them find coffee jobs. And I am joined tonight by a wonderful panel of experts, really, when it comes to addressing homelessness here in the city of Pasadena. So I look forward to introducing them before they speak. But let me share a little bit about our agenda for tonight. So we will be hearing from each panelist. Everyone will be kind of sharing their side of the story and their experience with addressing homelessness. And we'll also then, after hearing from every panelist, we'll take time to hear from you. So I would hope everyone has picked up a packet on your way in. And if not, if you could, raise your hand, because we want to make sure you have an opportunity to ask a question. And so if you, please just raise your hand. We'll get you a packet. There's an index card on the packet, and that would be the card to use for any questions that you would have for our panel tonight. After everyone has shared, we'll have time for some questions and answers. But for the sake of time, what we'll do is we'll collect throughout the night the questions that you write on your card, and I'll make at some point a call to collect them. We'll bring them all together, and we'll kind of look and shuffle through to find the most common questions that are being asked. That way those can get addressed first, just for the sake of time. And speaking of time, we plan to be done by 8 o'clock tonight, so that will be my job, to make sure we finish on time and to respect everyone's time. But again, we're excited to have everyone join us as we, in this workshop, take time to just discuss the homeless count, the numbers. You'll hear a PowerPoint on what has happened as a result of the count. We'll also get to hear some city strategies on addressing homelessness. And you'll also receive some practical advice, just some tools that anyone could use when it comes to helping our neighbors without homes. So that will be in your packet, and we'll take time to discuss that along the way. Well, let me go ahead and introduce our first panelist. So Sofia Herrera is a licensed clinical psychologist and a research faculty member at the Graduate School of Psychology at Fuller Theological Seminary, just down the road from here. She is also the director of the seminary's Office for Urban Initiatives, and she has been involved in the Pasadena homeless count for the past 7 years. So let us welcome Dr. Sofia as she shares with us tonight.
Thank you, Dan, for that introduction. My job tonight is to talk a little bit about how is it that we have to count persons who are experiencing homelessness in our community, and a bit about the methodology that we use to that effect. So why do we do the homeless count? Well, we do it because jurisdictions that receive federal funding for homeless services are required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to conduct a count. And that count has to be carried out in the last during the last 10 days, on a day during the last 10 days in January. And it's what we call a point in time. It's just a way of measuring from year to year the trends and the changes of the population for a specific jurisdiction. So who do we count when we're talking about the homeless count? Well, there's a very specific definition of the persons that we count. And we are talking about persons who are, according to the federal government, literally homeless. What does that mean? We only look for persons who are in what we call situations not meant for human habitation. So if you have a makeshift shelter, if you have a person living in a car, in a vehicle, an RV that is dilapidated, that is moving from time to time. Those are the persons that we're counting. Under this definition, we are not counting persons who are couch surfing or who are staying with friends and family. Those persons are considered persons at risk of homelessness for this particular purpose. How do we carry out the count in the city of Pasadena? Well, it really is a community effort. We rely on volunteers, and I am happy to say that Pasadena is a city that is really high in civic engagement, and we always have many volunteers, particularly from the faith community, that join us to do this effort. So there's about 120 individuals that sign up to do this on a yearly basis, and we basically ask them to go out and count in teams from during specific times of that particular day that has been chosen for the count. So this year we conducted the count on January the 23rd in the evening of that Tuesday from 8 to 10 at night, and then from 6 to 8 in the morning. Those teams are going out on both shifts. Those teams have been trained and oriented to the task prior to going into conducting this project. And there are many people from the community that come back to help us in this effort. So we do actually have some expert counters that help us carry out this effort from year to year. And that is very much appreciated because we wouldn't be able to do it any other way. We also have other persons that participate in the count, and those are the professional teams. And the professional teams are the Hope Team. Lieutenant Goodman is here tonight, and he is basically the supervisor of the Hope Team for the city. We also have outreach teams from Union Station, and Keith Hendrickson is here from Union Station. Those teams really go out to areas where we don't want the average volunteer to go. The volunteers go to specifically designated 17 areas within the city that have been agreed to by the Pasadena Partnership to End Homelessness, which is the entity in the city under the Housing Department that oversees this effort. Let me go back to say a little bit about who is counted, all right? We conduct basically two counts. One count is of persons who are out there on the streets, those persons that are visible, those persons that we encounter, even as we come into the library. And we also count persons who are not on the streets, who are sheltered, who are staying in shelters or who are staying in programs temporarily while they resolve their situation. So we do have an unshelter count, and we do have a shelter count. When the teams go out, they are very, very well trained into how to approach persons who are homeless. They are very well trained into where to go. There's a lot of effort beforehand, according to the guidelines from the federal government, to identify what we call sometimes hotspots, but basically key areas where groups congregate so that they can be identified. We also try to engage the help of persons with lived experience, persons who have been formerly homeless, so that we can be very specific in our efforts and effective in our efforts in finding out. Besides those 17 zones that we have divided the city into, and the adjacent areas or the embankments, the freeway embankments and so on, where the volunteers are not allowed to go, where only the professionals go. Besides those areas, we also count in parks, public areas like the libraries, and we do have 10 libraries in the city that we cover. We have some of our team members from the library here sitting in front, and they do cover the Central Library very, very well, specifically. We also have a supplement count that happens in the afternoon, and that supplement count is a youth count that is now also becoming another major effort. One of the things that we have found when it comes to youth is that they are not necessarily recognizable, youth tend to hide and try to blend in. And we do have to make a special effort to be able to find them and make sure that they are counted for this effort. When we go out and count, we just not do an observation. In other words, we just don't make a count, literal count of the person who is there, but we also ask questions. We do have a survey that asks a specific number of questions that have been identified by the federal government that we have to tabulate so that we can understand who are the specific subpopulations that are represented in that among those persons that we have counted. So the counters and the outreach teams go out there and take their time and actually ask specific questions to every single person that they encounter. Obviously, if that person does not want to respond to the questions, we basically respect the right to privacy and self-determination and move on to the next person. But we have very, very specific information from that survey that helps us understand who in that population we have. So for example, do we have families? Do we have families and children? Do we have individuals alone? Do we have couples? Do we have persons who are experiencing chronic health problems? Do we have persons who are experiencing mental illness? Do we have persons who are experiencing drug use or abuse? You're going to tell me about the time, right? Okay.
Yeah, that was my nod.
Okay, all right. And we have a way to identify the specific populations. And so how many are women? How many are men? How many are children? So that allows us basically to break down our numbers in manageable groups of people that we can then target for future planning. So we do this effort not just as a rah moment, right? Yeah, let's go out and find out who we have in the community, but for a specific purpose. And that is for planning for grants that the city writes to the federal government to obtain more services, funding for services, that is, and also for local planning with the Pasadena Partnership to End Homelessness. So that is really, in a nutshell, what we do with the homeless count, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you. Thank you, Sophia. When it comes to the methodology of the homeless count, it's critical that we hold to that year after year so that our numbers are strong and comparable year after year. But if you just came in, welcome. Welcome to this workshop as we're discussing the homeless count for 2018. And just invite you, as you're listening to a panelist share, write your question down on the index card, and we'll be collecting these later on the evening so that we can have a time of Q&A. Let me go ahead and now introduce our next speaker, who's going to be sharing about the results of the homeless count. So this might be the one thing you're waiting for all night, to see these results. So let me introduce now Jennifer O'Reilly Jones, who is the City of Pasadena's Homeless Programs Coordinator. And prior to joining this city, she worked for 5 years as a supportive housing specialist at several nonprofit homeless service providers here in Pasadena and Glendale. So will you join me in welcoming Jennifer tonight?
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to present to you the results of the 2018 Pasadena homeless count. As Sophia discussed, the homeless count was conducted on the evening of January 23rd and that early morning of January 24th by city staff and over 110 volunteers. The count's conducted annually in order to get a snapshot in time of the size and demographics of our homeless population. We use the same methodology each year so that comparisons can be made across data over time. The count is made up of two components, as Sophia discussed. Volunteers counted and surveyed unsheltered persons living on the street, in parks, abandoned buildings, vehicles, and other places not meant for human habitation. And sheltered persons include those staying in emergency shelters and transitional housing, or those using motel vouchers. This year, 32% of our homeless population was sheltered, and 68% was unsheltered. And again, the count does not include those who are living in overcrowded housing, doubled up with family or friends, or people who are at risk of homelessness. In total, 677 people experiencing homelessness were counted, which is an 18% increase over 2017. Here you'll see the numbers of unsheltered people experiencing homelessness since 2007. You can see that the increase we saw over last year was entirely in the unsheltered population. That is not to say that we have reduced the numbers of shelters in Pasadena. That's not what's happening. The numbers of sheltered people experiencing homelessness have been relatively flat in the past few years. What we're seeing here are the effects of the Housing First approach, which was first implemented in Pasadena in 2011. Under this philosophy, permanent housing, and not shelters or other services, became the primary and most immediate goal in addressing homelessness. The results of Housing First was that homelessness was reduced by over 50% between 2011 and 2016. However, in the past 2 years, our homeless population has grown by over 28%. Here you can see the distribution of unsheltered people experiencing homelessness at the time of the count. The darker areas are more densely populated by people experiencing homelessness. And these are the zones that Sophia referred to that the volunteers were broken up into. Now we'll take a look at a few demographic breakdowns. Males represent 71% of our homeless population, compared to only 49% of our city's general population. African Americans are overrepresented in the homeless population. We see this in LA County as a whole and also nationwide. In response to last year's Greater Los Angeles homeless count, which included Pasadena's numbers, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority Commission recognized the need to dedicate focused attention to examine the barriers Black people may face when trying to exit homelessness. The Commission recently appointed the Ad Hoc Committee on Black People Experiencing Homelessness, and this committee is in the early stages of digging deeper into why we see this overrepresentation and what can be done to provide greater equity in providing homeless services across the county. We identify 4 main subpopulations with particular vulnerabilities or needs. The numbers of veterans, people experiencing chronic homelessness, and families have all decreased in recent years, with a notable 27% decline in chronic homelessness since 2016. This is an indication that the city's focus on supportive housing is working. Homelessness among youth age 18 to 24 has increased slightly, although this group still only makes up about 6% of the total homeless population. Almost 40% of people experiencing homelessness in Pasadena are aged 50 and older. This is a 65% increase in this age group compared to 2016. We saw a 35% increase in those who did not meet the definition of chronic homelessness, meaning they had not experienced homelessness for more than 12 months or they did not have a qualifying disability. High rents and a shortage of housing likely impacted this growth in homelessness. This line represents rent burden among the lowest income renters in Pasadena, which is how much of one's income goes toward rent. For the lowest income renters, even 100% of their income would not cover the rent. We started seeing the effects of people's inability to pay the rent in 2016, when the homeless population began to increase again, particularly among those who are not chronically homeless. Now we'll take a look at our local strategies to reduce homelessness. The solution to homelessness is housing. Supportive housing offers long-term support for those with the highest needs. Housing, along with supportive services as needed, can ensure housing retention even among those with severe mental illness and substance abuse disorders. This is often the most appropriate resource for those who are chronically homeless. Rapid rehousing provides time-limited rental assistance and targeted supportive services. This is the most appropriate resource to address the rise in non-chronic homelessness that we are seeing. And homelessness prevention provides short-term support for those imminently at risk of homelessness. In 2017, 161 people experiencing homelessness in Pasadena were housed. 97 of them through rapid rehousing and 64 through supportive housing. Some of these individuals were housed in Pasadena, but due to the shortage of housing, many had to relocate. Every week in Pasadena, 14 people become homeless, and only 3 people are housed. Homelessness is outpacing housing. We need more affordable and available housing to solve this issue. This year, the City of Pasadena will be receiving $793,000 of funding through Measure H, a countywide initiative to combat homelessness. These funds will be used for homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, case management, housing navigators, motel vouchers, landlord incentives, and job development. I want to talk about the ways that everyone in this room can help solve homelessness in our city. You should have a flyer in your hands that gives a little more details about the 6 tools to address homelessness. So the first one is refer to services. If you observe someone who is experiencing homelessness and needs help, you can go to our website at pasadenapartnership.org and submit a request for an outreach team. And we'll pass this information on to the various outreach teams that operate in Pasadena. We encourage you to get educated about homelessness. We recommend that everyone take a look at our full homeless count report, which is available on our Pasadena Partnership website. You can contribute to a real change meter. You can find these orange meters around the city, and they are part of a program administered by the Flint Ridge Center. Your donation will be matched 100% by the United Way, and 100% of the proceeds go directly to housing people experiencing homelessness. You can actually find one of these meters in the library parking lot, and it takes coins and credit cards. Another way to end homelessness is to engage landlords. Housing is the solution to homelessness, and we need landlords who are willing to be part of the solution. The city is now offering monetary incentives for landlords who rent to people experiencing homelessness. There's a contact number on your flyer you can call to get more information about this program. You can volunteer. We encourage you to volunteer with a local homeless service provider. It's a great way to learn about homelessness and make a difference in someone's life. And finally, in certain situations, it is appropriate to call for help. We've listed the non-emergency Pasadena Police Department number on your flyer. And of course, in any dangerous emergency situation, you should call 911. We'd like to thank Urban Initiatives and the 110 volunteers who made our 2018 homeless count possible. We'd also like to thank our many community partners for their contributions to the fight against homelessness in Pasadena. And again, you can find the full homeless count report at pasadenapartnership.org. Thank you.
So I know a lot of information there. I encourage you to visit the website, download the results, and spend some time, a little more time in depth going through everything. But we're graced in Pasadena to have nonprofits that are helping us reach and connect with those experiencing homelessness. So it's not just a matter of numbers, but real people. And so I'm excited to introduce now Keith, who's with the street outreach team, or representing Union Station's homeless services, their outreach team, and his experience with that, and being able to share what it's like to be able to engage with people. So we get now to hear from Keith Hendrickson, who's the SPA3 Coordinated Entry System of the Western Region Manager at Union Station Homeless Services. He lives in a world of acronyms, so yeah, they're all spelled out here though, which is very nice for us. Thank you. He has worked in the field of homeless services for 10 years, and prior to his work in homeless services, he worked with individuals with severe developmental disabilities. So join me in welcoming Keith tonight.
Good evening, everybody. I want to start off by thanking Jenny for asking me to do this. It is a privilege to stand in front of you right now and be a representative of what I'm doing and talk about what I do, something that I'm absolutely passionate about, that I have immersed myself in for ever since I can remember. It's always been an issue that has been dear to me. I had family that experienced homelessness. At one point early on, I was homeless myself. It's not about me. I'm here to talk about what we do to address these numbers and to address these folks. So Jenny just hit you guys with some numbers that are kind of sad, right? The program that I run is called Coordinated Entry System, and I work with Union Station Homeless Services. Basically, Union Station has a lot of different programs that we offer. The particular program that I run is focused on street-based outreach and case management. So we're getting into the numbers about the homeless count, and we're seeing the numbers rise a little bit, and that was a little disturbing for me because we've done a lot of work and we've housed a lot of people, and we've overcome a lot of barriers, and our partnerships with other organizations became so much stronger. So when we see these numbers, it's frustrating, and it's frustrating to us as outreach workers because we just want to get folks housed. We want to meet with them. We want to see them get some type of normalcy back into their lives. You know, before I get into the details of what street outreach looks like, I kind of like to preference the things like, you know, homelessness, there's a lot of different faces of it. It's not one particular type of person. When it's not one particular type of person, there's not one particular solution. There's a lot of different solutions that we have to come up with. And we're facing, on a daily basis, new barriers that we're not even aware of and how to maneuver around that. But we have a lot of support, and things are becoming more streamlined. More organizations are kind of coming together, and we're all fighting for the same cause. So what does street outreach look like? Well, to be honest, it entails a lot of patience with folks. Just to be real, I have very skilled staff that go out. We go out on a weekly basis. We were part of the homeless count, and we went out with that. But that's not the only time that we go out. You know, we have scheduled outreach on a weekly basis here in Pasadena. You might be seeing a gray van zooming down Colorado Boulevard on Tuesday mornings with a Union Station logo on it, and seeing folks get out and handing lunches. That's my team. That's me. That's my team. That's what we're doing. You have to come with an offering with folks. These folks that are experiencing homeless a lot of them have a lot of issues. There's a lot of damage that has been done. Maybe some self-damage, some history, some family damage. There's a lot of different components, and that's why there's not just one face to homelessness. There's so many different components as to why people are homeless. Is it because they're on a fixed income and their landlord decided to raise their rent, but you know, their SSI isn't raising as the rent's raising? You know, like, that's a common theme right now. We're seeing people with fixed incomes being forced out of their house. And so we have to assess the situation, and we come across a lot of different folks, and we have what's called a VSPDAP. And it's a universal tool. Some of you might know what biopsychosocials are in the psychology world. It's somewhat similar to that. After building a rapport with a client, and they trust us to ask some questions, and they will answer them, we get into a pretty lengthy survey about their history of homelessness, their medical history, their finances, their criminal history, if there is any. After that assessment is complete, it gives us a better idea of how we can triage these folks to maybe go to different programs. Is this somebody that is recently homeless, that lost their job, that that doesn't have any savings? Well, there's a program for that. You heard some key words in Jenny's presentation. You hear permanent supportive housing and you hear rapid rehousing. So a little bit about rapid rehousing. We're engaging with folks and we're meeting folks on the street like, hey, I just lost my job, ran out of savings. What do I do? There's a program for that. So we triage those folks and we send them along to a program. And then at some point, when there is housing available, they get housed and they're on a subsidy for a short-term time. But I'm not here necessarily to talk about just that. One of the main things that, and the folks that you're seeing on a daily basis are those folks that are chronically homeless, that you see on the corner every single day, that you see with, a sweater over their head. Those are folks that have been out for a long time. How they got to Pasadena, whether they were residents before Pasadena, we figure all that stuff out. And we try to engage and give them some hope for the future. Again, like I said, patience is a big part of what our jobs are, because we're dealing with folks, again, that are damaged, that have mental health issues, that can't communicate their needs or vocalizations. And we're only outreach workers. We're not, we're not mental health specialists. We're not doctors. We can't diagnose on the street. All we can do is try to build a relationship with that person in hopes that they allow us to kind of pick them up and go down the path of trying to find a home and getting some type of stabilization in their life. And that's what we're doing on a daily basis. It's incredibly difficult, but what I can say is in the last year, they've created, just in the Los Angeles County, they've created 500 outreach positions just in the last year. So you're seeing a lot of folks go out and engage with these people that are homeless. And I keep going back to the same thing. You're not seeing that, there's so many different faces of homelessness that we need to really have our outreach workers get in there and really dissect and see what's going on and see what type of services that best fits this person, because not everybody is going to go into a rapid rehousing program. Not everybody is going to go into a permanent supportive housing type situation. So we have to end the cycle of chronic homelessness first and consider all factors. I encourage any of you to, if you're interested, please talk to me afterwards. If you're more curious, or even if you would maybe like to do some type of outreach with my team at some point, I welcome you all to please accept my offer for that, to see exactly what it is that we're doing out there. Because the majority of these folks are willing to talk, but and those are the ones that we're housing. But the ones that are resistant, we need to come together as a community and treat it with a little more compassion and understanding. And this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. This is going to take time to find the appropriate placement for folks so they don't keep ending up out onto the street. That's what we do not want. We want to get them into what is the best fit for them and what they feel comfortable with doing, so they don't return back to the street. So thank you guys for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, two panelists to go. And so I'd invite you now to begin thinking about any questions you would have. We'll collect those questions after our next speaker. But as you heard from Keith, it's a very complex situation that many people find themselves in. So it requires a very complex response. Thankfully, here in the city of Pasadena, we have all sorts of different groups and agencies and organizations working together. That even includes our Pasadena Police Department. We, in particular, have a HOPE team. So I'll let Lieutenant Mark Goodman share about the HOPE team and what they do through the Pasadena Police Department. Lieutenant Mark Goodman is a 24-year veteran of the Pasadena Police Department and has worked in all three of the department's operational divisions. Currently, Lieutenant Goodman is the executive officer of the Field Operations Division Patrol and the HOPE team administrator. Lieutenant Goodman is also a law enforcement subject matter expert on homelessness. So will you join me now in welcoming Lieutenant Goodman?
So as Dan just eloquently said, homelessness is a complex issue, and all the folks that are on the stage with me here tonight are truly our partners in trying to eradicate and eliminate homelessness here in the city of Pasadena. The police department is part of the solution in reference to placing people into permanent supportive housing, which is our goal. The HOPE team started in 2002 as a pilot project with the Pasadena Police Department and the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. The project started with one officer being paired with one clinician from DMH, Department of Mental Health. And so the idea was to have a clinician on board with a police officer in the front seat of a police car so that the clinician could get real-time eyes and ears on the problem, and then bring the resources that the LA County Department of Mental Health has to bear in reference to trying to take people from homelessness to housed. So that was in 2002. We're now in 2018, and the HOPE team has grown from one officer and one clinician to 3 officers and 3 clinicians. So we have 6-day-a-week coverage, I'm pleased to report. Not quite 24 hours a day, but we have people who are assigned to a day watch, to a mid-watch, and to an evening watch. So we have coverage, generally speaking, from around 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning to around 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Depends on our needs, depends on our projects, depends on if we're trying to address a specific person in a case management type of role. So that is sort of the schedule that our personnel are deployed on. Arrest is not one of our primary goals with the HOPE team. Our primary goal is to respond to folks who need outreach and who are suffering from mental health emergencies and are in crisis. And that's what makes part of our HOPE team unique. I keep saying HOPE, but it's an acronym for Homeless Outreach Psychological Evaluation Team. So other law enforcement agencies took notice of our program in 2002 and in fact used it as a model for their own HOPE teams. They have different acronyms, different names, but almost every agency in Los Angeles County, including the Los Angeles Police Department and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, have similar types of teams. What makes our team unique is that our clinicians and our specially trained officers respond to people who are actually suffering from a mental health crisis right now. So they're specially trained to interact with people who are suffering from these crises, to de-escalate, and to get them into a safe place where they can get treatment. Just to give you an idea of how busy my HOPE officers are, the police department responds to around 400 to 500 calls per month that we can specifically tie to homeless individuals. Many times we find that these individuals are suffering from mental health issues or drug or alcohol issues, or perhaps both. So we have a large crossover population, folks that are homeless, individuals who are suffering from mental health issues, and also people who may be suffering from drug addiction issues, I should say. So sometimes we get what I call the triple crossover, sort of the triple threat. Those individuals are particularly difficult to engage, but it's really all about building trust. Because Keith's teams come out on a bi-weekly basis perhaps, and they engage with the same individuals that we do. So the idea is to build trust on many different levels, because we all sort of represent governmental type of agencies. Obviously the police department is an obvious governmental agency, whereby Keith's organization is a nonprofit, but still may be viewed as part of a larger government-type driven organization. So the idea is not to arrest individuals, but rather to try to refer them and to build that trust so that we can try to hand them off to Keith's team. And we've had some successes. You know, you saw we had 161 people housed in 2017. I'd like to think that the Hope team played at least a small part in a couple of those cases that I can think of right off the top of my head. So they're a very, very busy team, but their job really is to work in collaboration with all the nonprofits that are represented here and some that are not. But that's really what the Hope team does. I'm happy to take your questions later on this evening. I look forward to receiving them and answering them. I see many familiar faces in the room, so thank you for coming out this evening and being a part of the workshop. It's appreciated.
Speaking of questions, if you have any, please go ahead and I think we're going to pass those down, if you don't mind, maybe to the end of your row. And we'll start collecting those now. But in hearing Lieutenant Goodman's report, you know, it's good to hear all the different groups working together. There is hope that people experiencing homelessness will find housing and really a new experience on life. And so I would like to now welcome our final speaker tonight, June Carr, who's had her own experience with homelessness. She is a 30-year resident of Pasadena, and she was a client of Union Station's Housing and Jobs Collaborative and is now employed as a peer housing navigator in the multidisciplinary team outreach program at Union Station. So join me in welcoming June as she shares her story.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. And I want to say also thank you to Jenny. Before I speak on my homeless experience, I would like to just let you know a little history, how I became homeless. I was a parent advocate / parent partner, and I worked with DCFS. Not for them, but with them. And what I did was I helped many parents gain custody of their children, reunify, and I did all kinds of things. I helped them find housing. I helped them get linked with mental health providers, doctors, and all kinds of things. So anyway, what happened was, as I was servicing these people, I did not do self-care. I worked hard, I worked over, and I went beyond what I should have done while taking care of myself. But that is my makeup. I'm a people's person and I'm a caregiver. So with that being said, I started having anxiety attacks on the freeway and I was in deep depression. And I didn't realize it until I started having these anxiety attacks. So eventually my job found out that I was having these on the clock as I was working. So they advised me and wanted me to get mental health services. I did for a while. Anyway, eventually it costed me my job. And I said that to say that we can have, and I really made good money, and I was able to handle my own rent, all that type of stuff. And I was able to support myself, but I never saw it coming. So I said that to say that homelessness has no, homelessness is not prejudice. Homelessness could happen at any time to anybody, anywhere. And now, when I became homeless, because I had the resources to Union Station, I knew to go there, and I told myself that, okay, June, you helped all these other people, now it's time to help yourself. So I went to the Union Station down at the Adult Center on Raymond, and I had a meeting and signed up with one of the young men. Matter of fact, he's on Keith's team. Anyway, so with that being said, I was part of the Housing and Jobs collaboration, rapid rehousing. But before, I wouldn't let them pay my move-in money. I got together with my son and I paid all my move-in money. I was reluctant of taking that part of the service. But anyway, eventually I did, and I spoke to my landlord, who never ever heard about the program, but they accepted the program. I was their first person. I said that to say that maybe they might take another family. Anyway, so now I was introduced to Jenny, and I started doing in-home health care services for some of Jenny's clients. And while I was doing that, I had a caregiver, no, a care coordinator from Union Station working with me. And she wasn't moving fast enough for me, not putting her down, but like I told her, I said, this is your 9 to 5, but this is my life we're talking about. So I did the footwork. I went out there and got myself together with a mental health provider. As I said, I found my own house. I got my money together and moved in to the place. And so I asked her, I said, so how can I get your job? And so she said, you won't qualify for my job for at least a year of being off the program. I said that to say, because I'm a success story, the day I filled out, I worked with a young man who is also a Union Station employee. So he worked with me. He told me about the position of a peer housing navigator. And with that, I was like, okay, can I apply for that, being that I'm on the program? Would it be a conflict of interest? And he said, I don't think so, we'll see. So anyway, the first day of my job, I told the orientation, the lady who did the orientation, that I was in the program. And she said, okay, let me go find my supervisor and let me find my manager. She couldn't find either. So she went to the head, which is Ryan. And Ryan said, okay, send her in. So I went in Ryan's office and I just really started talking a lot, right? And so Ryan said, hold on, you already got the job. So what are we gonna do to, how are we gonna fix this problem? I said, well, I'll graduate myself early. So I chose the job over the program. I still had a lot of time to go, but I chose the job. So since January of 2018, I've been a housing navigator, a peer housing navigator, outreach worker. And I'm gonna come from behind here, because I want you guys to understand that what I see out here, and if I get emotional, we need to see emotions, because we need to know that these people need us. And the reason I say that is because I go on the streets, I go to encampments, I go to the riverbeds, I go to where these people are. At first they didn't trust me, but the more I came, the more I gave hygiene kits, the more I gave, and just underwear to women. Women are out there and they have special needs that aren't being met. But I make sure every time I go out, I take something for somebody, because I learned as a parent partner, when you give somebody something, they know you mean business. So I give them what we have. We have donations, thank God for the volunteers, the donors who bring all these things to the Union Station for us to take out to these people. The youngest person I have out there is 18 years old, living and sleeping in his car with his dad. No money, no food, no anything. So I have empathy and I care about these people, because I've been there, I've done that. And I know how it feels to be left out. I know how it feels to be without. I didn't look homeless, and I didn't carry myself as a homeless person, but I carried my integrity and I carried my dignity with me. Some of these people have lost all that. Some of these people are on drugs because they're out here and they have to cope with life. And they have to cope with their situations, because how can you be out here? People are building caves, digging in the in the mountains, opening up the mountains, living inside of the mountain in these caves. They're building hutches. They're living with rats and roaches and just snakes and coyotes and everything like that. But these are people. These are people that belong to somebody. And if we as a community don't care and we ignore them, we don't know what might happen to them. But I said that to say that if we put our feet to where our mouths are, we can make things happen. And like they said, it is a shortage in housing. And I just want you guys to just really think about, and I know you're here because you care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be here. So I just would encourage you to do your best, to do whatever you can, even if it's you see somebody and you give them a loaf of bread. My client told me today, I said, how are you with food? He said, we're sharing a loaf of bread. That broke my heart. I went to the Union Station. He told me that yesterday. So this morning before I went to my offices in Irwindale, I serviced from Sierra Madre to Glendora. So I went to the Union Station on Raymond, and I went in the kitchen and I asked, what do you guys have that I can take to these people? And so they filled me up a bag. So my next thing is to take them. I link people to general relief. I help them get to the doctors, get their physical bodies together in shape. I link them to mental health service providers and whatever I can to help them. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, June. Wow, I don't know how to follow that. Thank you, June. Thank you for being just open and honest and just sharing from your heart your experience. If you have an opening, let me know. I want to apply. I want to work for you. That means I'm going somewhere. So, okay, I'm going to talk to you after. Wow. Let's say thank you again to June for sharing her story. Thank you, June. Thank you. We have now a video we want to share with you, and I'll then be back up after the video to begin asking your questions.
Welcome to my house. This is IE for my breakfast, and this is Daddy and Jeremiah. That's from my learning books. My mommy have a nice kitchen, and she can cook chicken and rice and cereal and oatmeal. This is my room. They can only play toys. It's so comfy. This is Mom and Dad's room. That's Mommy's candle. You blow, and it was done for bedtime.
The groundbreaking for us, people that have come through being homeless and landing into a place like this, it's a new beginning for all of us. It gives us that hope that there is people out there that really care for people that go through stuff like that. When we found out that there was programs that do this, well, when we get to where we need to get to, we want to give and help. Because building more of this really gives human beings a new beginning.
Supportive housing is what we utilize to address homelessness. It's the one measure that really ends homelessness. If we put a homeless person, if a person enters into a shelter, they're still homeless. But if they enter into permanent housing, then they're not homeless anymore.
It's part of a housing first process where people have a safe place. They have a place where they can stay, where they can build a foundation that they can grow from. Our goal here is basically to find out what the goals of the families are. What are the goals of the people that are going to live here?
All the programs in Union Station use the service collaborative plans. This helps give us a way of tracking, also helps the residents to be able to plan what it is that they want to do in order for us to assist them to get to that point.
Because we're supportive services, We handle things on a day-to-day basis, so when they come to us and maybe someone's in crisis, we try to get them the necessary help in mental health, connect them with services in that way. It's just basically what do they need on a daily basis.
I have 2 care coordinators on my staff. They provide all kinds of services, sometimes transportation to a doctor's appointment, sometimes just support therapy.
It's very important on supportive housing projects that the tenants would all be screened. And this means they're screened for their credit history, also their criminal background checks are made.
Despite some of the stereotypes, affordable housing really doesn't impact crime. It really doesn't erode the quality of life in the neighborhood. They're highly regulated, they're highly monitored.
The safety level is actually enhanced because we're taking people from off the street and putting them into a situation that's stable regardless of their addiction or their mental health issues. And then it allows us to really start working with those individuals in order to make them people who can contribute to the neighborhood itself.
Property manager is very important. They maintain the property, they execute leases, they enforce house rules.
They regulate to the best of their ability the conduct and the goings and comings of those clients. So it really is a seamless network behind the scenes through housing, through the police department, through the property manager, to the client, and moreover, to the neighborhood.
Even with the parking reductions on these properties, supportive housing projects in Pasadena have not had an adverse effect on parking or traffic. Other mobility options are used: biking, taking public transportation, walking.
Local businesses really don't feel an impact from supportive housing for homeless people. If there is an impact, it's a positive one in that there are fewer people on the street, fewer people in doorways, fewer people sleeping on sidewalks and under bridges.
Supportive housing has been an uplift for property values. Projects are well maintained, well designed. They fit very well into a community, and I think that makes all the difference in the world. Property values continue to rise, and they will continue to rise in Pasadena.
One of the things we're particularly proud of here in Pasadena is that we've seen a 54% drop in homelessness since 2009. It's a really interesting time in homeless services in that with the passage of Proposition H and Triple H, that we see dollars coming in, which is really important for us to actually get at combating and ending homelessness. But the dollars alone are not going to cure this. Housing has to go somewhere, and so we together have to band together and say, yes, I'm willing to have in my neighborhood a residential site so that people can come in and get off the street, and that's going to take a collective effort on all of our parts.
I supported the development of supportive housing because it fills such a very important need. My experience with Marv's Place, when the neighborhood saw the renderings and they understood the idea of families living together, they began to come on board, was so positive. I would love to see another supportive housing in my district or in the city at large. It really hits the sweet spot of helping homeless people, families, individuals move into a successful lifestyle.
To have a place that you're safe, you're comfortable, you're growing, mentally and physically. You get new thoughts and new plans and new ideas.
Having a foundation, being able to, have a place to start to get back into normalcy, feeling like we can continue to the next step.
And just the quality of life and value of life and just, not being limited anymore.
I'm very grateful to have it. I have a place to live, I have a place to go into, feel safe.
We're human, and we go through stuff. And just having a place like this, it was like, wow. When we finally found ground here, we felt straight at home. We love it so much that we are actually getting involved in the communities. I want to give back. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your thoughtful questions. Looking at time, we just have under 30 minutes here, so maybe ask if the panelists could keep their responses as brief as possible, but yet hopefully answer the questions that are being asked. So we're just going to jump right in and get a question going here. This would be a question in regards to, let's say, the homeless count itself, which we started with tonight. What percent are from Pasadena or cities nearby versus outside the state of California? So a question regarding maybe people moving around and how many might be local versus from other places.
I'm going to do my best to answer this, but I have some colleagues here who I know are better at pulling up these percentages. So correct me if I'm wrong, I believe 49% this year are from Pasadena, and an additional 43% are from surrounding areas. So that leaves just a very small percentage that have come from really outside LA County. A lot of people get this idea of people coming from the East Coast or different states and coming out to California and ending up being homeless in our cities, and that's really not what we're seeing. We're seeing people, the largest group are people who are from Pasadena, and even those people who are from surrounding areas, a lot of them have ties to Pasadena. They have family here, they have jobs here, or they grew up here. So it is really a local issue that we're seeing.
Great, thank you. Maybe a question for Sophia in regards to the count itself. Does the city use the same places to do the counts, or do you count people just simply where they are? So this would be in regards to the methodology for the count.
Hello. Okay. Yes. We are consistent from year to year. So one of the things that we do in terms of coverage of all the zones is to be consistent and to assign enough people to cover all the areas as much as possible. So yes, we cover pretty much every single zone. Raise your hand if you went out and counted this year. Okay. So you can ask them, you know. I told them when I was training them, I says, I really need you to know that if somebody questions the areas that we have covered, that I can refer them back to you. So you can talk to any of those people who raise their hands. We do try to cover every area as consistently as possible from year to year so that we can compare apples to apples.
Maybe a follow-up question, too, would be regarding women in particular.
Yes.
So women hide as much as possible because of maybe fear and attacks by men. So how do you find women in particular?
So we basically canvass, as I said before, as thoroughly as we can possibly do that with the volunteers that we have. We try to have a balance of males and females in each team so that women who are approached feel comfortable by being approached by other women, because that is an issue, that is for sure. We also make sure that we count in places where women gather. So for example, our partnership with the Women's Room at Friends Indeed, they do a very good job of counting the women there. You know, taking those things into account, it has been very positive, actually. I don't think we have an undercount of women. I'm part of a national group that is called the 1 in 4. Basically, the name is been given because it's been found that 25% of all the adults that are homeless are unaccompanied women. And our numbers in Pasadena, in fact, are a little higher than 25%. They're almost 29%, if I remember correctly. So it's almost 30%, and that's the case for LA as well. So I think that, in fact, we're doing a very good job of finding women.
Great, thank you. Ginny, I'm thinking of the presentation you gave and letting us know that permanent supportive housing, or housing is the answer. One question here is, what are the plans for building more affordable permanent supportive housing? And how, a follow-up question, do you suggest we can help get this built? So the question being how, or what plans are in place for building more permanent supportive housing?
So the last supportive housing building that opened in Pasadena was Marv's Place that you saw in the video, that opened 2 years ago. And we currently don't have any supportive housing buildings in the pipeline. There are none being built right now. And so it's during these past 2 years that we've started to see this rise in homelessness again. The first step, of course, is to get a plan in place. It takes a lot of pieces to the puzzle. Siting, developers, there's a lot of funding involved, and we need approval from the City Council. And so we are looking at a number of city-owned sites to develop new supportive housing projects in the city. And we will need community support at every stage of the planning. So, you know, once we get a plan approved, it will still be several years until one of these buildings opens. So we really are working hard to get something approved as soon as possible.
Okay. So lots of support from the city residents. Okay, yeah, wonderful. So we know we're going to have to kind of wait and work through this. But when it comes to maybe people that we encounter, so maybe a question here for Keith with the street outreach team, just so we have some good realistic expectations hearing that news. How long does it take from the response team when they've been contacted to come out and meet with someone? And then, yeah, so I'll stop there. Yeah, what's that time frame look like?
Typically, we try to get out between 48 to 72 hours with the call. It really depends upon, that's how we were kind of running things a couple months ago. Like I had mentioned before, there had been 500 new positions opened up in the outreach, not just in obviously Pasadena, but all throughout Los Angeles County. We now have an actual outreach coordinator that just came on, so the majority of the requests are going to her, and she's triaging to the appropriate team. So I would say anywhere from 48 to 72 hours, and occasionally 15 minutes sometimes, you know, if we're capable to do it. We'll try to get out there as quick as possible.
And I just want to add that we actually will soon, about midsummer, have another new outreach team operating the city out of Friends Indeed, and so we'll have additional street outreach workers, and that should hopefully increase response times too, and just our capacity to meet with those who are living on the street.
So maybe, again, kind of following up on realistic expectations, outreach team comes, they meet with this individual, maybe they go through the vulnerability index and the coordinated entry system. So how long might it take for someone, an individual, to be sheltered or find housing? And that could be maybe for anyone on the team.
I'll attempt this. I've seen it as quick as 1 day.
Wow.
And I've seen it take as long as a couple of years. It really depends upon the resources that we have available at the time. Depends upon what the individual is willing to, if they're willing to relocate. You know, there's a lot of different variables, but realistically, at this point right now, I don't like to put a number, but
okay.
I mean, we're looking at anywhere between about 6-7 months, realistically.
And one thing we've heard from our outreach teams is that for every 10 individuals that they outreach on the street, there's only one housing resource available for them. And it just points again to this dire shortage of housing that we have. And while we're working really hard to build more housing, we really also need more landlords to become part of the solution. And so again, we have new financial incentives for landlords who are willing to rent to individuals experiencing homelessness. So hopefully that can help get more people into housing faster.
Great. So, you know, I think in hearing too then, Keith, that like maybe that person is also not ready to relocate. So a question on that is, of the number of homeless reported in the count, are there people who do not want to be housed? And if so, maybe what are some of those factors or indicators of that? Or, and maybe even Officer Goodman, if from your HOPE team, would want to share it too. But
So as Keith said, it's a little bit difficult to quantify the numbers of people who actually are receptive to our efforts in building trust, and then in turn placing those individuals into the coordinated entry system, and then navigating that system and actually getting that person housed. I don't like to use the words service resistant because it's a label. And people who are so-called service resistant may be service receptive at any given time. So really, every time we contact a person or Keith's team contacts a person, we have to almost start over from ground zero each and every time with the thought that the person is going to be receptive and be cooperative. We have to understand that there are folks within the homeless population that, as Dan said, do not wish to be housed, or at least presently don't wish to be housed. Doesn't mean they won't be down the line, but presently they don't wish to be housed. So some of those individuals present us special challenges, and those are the people that it's most important to build those relationships with.
Yeah. Keith, was there anything you wanted to add to that? Or? Okay, great, awesome. So how about for let's say, residents, I mean, it's wonderful that we have these professional outreach teams, either Pasadena Police Department, Union Station, but when we see, residents might see people chronically on the street, sleeping on sidewalks with signs, should we call the helplines, or should we just assume that the HOPE team already knows about this individual and is able to tolerate it? So help us think through that a little bit too. Yeah.
So please feel free to call us. We want individuals to call either the helpline or the police department directly. We would prefer that, unless it's an obvious emergency, the individuals who are calling us utilize the non-emergency 24-hour number. For those of you who have your cell phones out, it's 626-744-4241. Our primary objective will be to check on that person's welfare to determine whether or not they're in need of immediate medical assistance. And then if they're not in need of immediate medical assistance, then of course the process begins with doing some outreach. Now, each and every one of our police officers are specially trained to interact with individuals who are mentally ill. We start out with a 4-hour training program, and then we move on to an 8-hour training program for each and every one of our police officers. So as we hire new officers, of course, one of my priorities is to make sure that they get that training. So again, part of the training that they've all learned is to assess for a medical issue first, and let's move on to a mental health issue, and then last but not least, a law enforcement issue. You know, we try to employ the PIE model of policing, prevention, intervention, enforcement. You notice that enforcement is the last piece of that puzzle, especially for our homeless population, because we are not going to arrest our way out of homelessness. This is a social issue. It's not necessarily a law enforcement issue. Of course, there are people who are homeless who do break the law, and we do deal with those individuals appropriately, just as we deal with people who are not homeless who break the law. So we prefer to use prevention, intervention, enforcement. Of course, enforcement is the last sort of step in that process, but it's not against the law to be homeless.
But I wanted to kind of go back to just that kind of practical response that we were talking about, and where Keith was helping us, or I'm sorry, Officer Goodman was saying, yes, call, please call, even if you think they might have already been connected by the HOPE team. But June, I wanted to hear from you just on that practical level. Should we give those experiencing homelessness money or food? Just again, that practical response.
Personally, I wouldn't give. Need my glasses. Anyway, personally, I wouldn't give money, cash. I would give them food, or I would buy the food and give it to them before I even started this work. That's what I would do.
Going back to you there on the HOPE team, a question here is, has the city considered pulling together a medical outreach team, since that's one of the things you guys were really concerned about, consisting of dedicated nurses, doctors, to better serve the chronically ill? So I don't know, Officer Goodman, if you want to start there and then pass it on to anyone that...
I'm going to go ahead and let Jenny answer that.
Okay, jump on in.
Actually, I think this might be a better question for June to answer. June is on a multidisciplinary team that includes nurses. So June, do you want to talk about
Our
what?
team does consist of a nurse with each site, and we have sites in Irwindale, El Monte, Pomona, and as Jenny said, they're going to start another team in Pasadena.
Any sort of partnership with Huntington Hospital that anyone knows of?
I can speak to that. So every other month, the HOPE team is involved with a group at Huntington Hospital. It's called the Super User Group. And the Super User Group is a way to identify individuals, as the name implies, who use services quite a bit, mainly EMS and law enforcement. So the idea is to do some case management up front. So I'll give you an example. We had an individual who had been using the EMS system at the end of every month, and Huntington Hospital helped provide me with statistics in reference to when this person was most likely to call. So that allowed me to have my HOPE officers check on the person every day during the month in an effort to try to assess her needs early on. And we did that in collaboration with some of Union Station's personnel who are stationed at, it was at Centennial Place. So I was in constant communication, and I think Keith may have seen a few of the emails. I was in communication with the social worker that's assigned to Centennial Place so that she knew what we were doing in reference to visiting this person, and then she could provide support on the back end. We had limited success. It's a work in progress, and we generally identify one or two different people every month.
I would just add we're also expecting a new program in a few months to come online. It's a collaboration between Housing Works and Huntington Hospital, also working with these super users, and we're hoping to piece together the outreach, the medical community, and some housing resources specifically for those individuals. So that's kind of in the works right now.
That's great. Jenny, I think a follow-up question as well in regards to development, housing development, because we're looking for more housing. That's what we're after. There's a couple questions that relate to this, but since homelessness and affordable housing, two sides of the same issue, what is the city of Pasadena doing to create incentives for developers and others to create more affordable housing or more units? So what is the city of Pasadena doing to incentivize the developers to develop more units?
I'm starting to get a little feedback on my mic. I don't think the issue is the lack of developer interest. I think that, again, it's finding the appropriate sites, getting the community support, and getting approval from City Council to move forward. There's a lot of money right now to leverage for developing these types of supportive housing buildings. There's also a lot of money through Measure H to provide those ongoing support services. So we're really right now focused on siting and community support and getting approval to move forward.
And I would say that part of that community support is crucial. We oftentimes have to fight against NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And we want to change that paradigm to yes in my backyard. So that's something that if you can help us spread the word about, and if you can basically think of the projects that you saw in the video, Mark's Place, Euclid Villa, Centennial Place, those programs are well managed, and in fact can be an example and models of what we can accomplish if we have good community support for yes in my backyard.
Maybe another follow-up question in that same area, it would be, is it possible for the city to buy out or repurpose abandoned buildings? So maybe we're like looking around and we see something and we're like, that could be a great place to redevelop for people to use experiencing homelessness. Is that a possibility? And if so, what would be possible there?
It is a possibility, and it's an option that we're looking at to repurpose buildings that already exist in our community. It's certainly faster to convert buildings into housing than to build them from scratch. So it's something we're actively looking at on a few different sites.
Thank you. I know funding's a big deal. So, ma'am, let me go ahead and let you ask your question again.
So I think the question is the funding distributed kind of equally
evenly
across counties? And the answer to that's no. It's certainly scaled for the size of your population. It's one of the big reasons that we conduct the count every year, to get a sense of our needs and so that we can get appropriate resources to address them.
It's really based on poverty rates for the area, and that's how the allocation of funding comes from the federal government. And that's taken into account every time that we have to write a grant. And they also, my understanding is that HUD lately is looking into the cost of rents for specific jurisdictions. So San Francisco may be much higher than we are here in Pasadena, though who knows by how much, because I'm from San Francisco and I'm from Pasadena, and I see it going up here too. So it really depends on the cost of living for each area. So the allocation is different based on poverty rates and the cost of living and the cost of housing.
That's great. Well, we have time for one last question, but this would be in regards to, so maybe anyone that feels comfortable answering, any services available to ensure the children of homeless families remain in school and are cared for. So any services available for the children of homeless families to stay in school? Yeah.
So we do collaborate with PUSD to identify families that are in need and make sure they have appropriate services so the families can get housed and regain their stability, and the children can stay in school. And I think that's also something we see in these supportive housing projects. Like Marb's Place you saw in the video, one of the things that the case manager is going to be working with the family about is, the services for the child. And that's the effort there, is to break the cycle of homelessness. We do see it's a generational issue, and the more support we can wrap around a family now, hopefully we can break that cycle and prevent that child from falling back into homelessness.
Thank you. So we're out of time. So again, want to thank you all for coming out this evening and spending this time with us to learn about the homeless count. Hopefully your questions were answered or you learned something new in the presentations and the speakers that shared with us. So let us thank our panelists for being here and sharing tonight. Thank you so much.